Captain Jake Morrison stood in the cargo bay of his ship and looked at something he never expected to see in his 15 years of space travel. An old alien woman was on her knees in front of him. Her silver hair fell down past her shoulders and covered her pointed ears that shook with emotion. Tears ran down her face as she held onto the bottom of his uniform jacket with her thin hands. She had 6 fingers on each hand, which reminded Jake that she was not human, but something else entirely. Woman was Silvari, and her people were known across the galaxy as ancient and proud. They lived on forest worlds far from human space, and rarely spoke to outsiders. For one of their elders to kneel before a human was something that should never happen. Jake felt very uncomfortable watching this old woman cry at his feet. Behind him, his crew members stood frozen and confused. His first officer, Amy Brooks, looked at Jake with wide eyes that seemed to ask what they should do. Nobody moved or spoke for several long seconds. The old woman finally looked up at Jake with violet-colored eyes that were filled with sadness and hope. When she spoke, her voice was soft and musical, like wind through trees. She said that her name was Grandmother Lyra, and she needed his help desperately. Jake reached down and gently helped her stand up because it felt wrong to let an elderly person stay on the ground. He asked her what kind of help she needed and why she came to his ship. Lyra took a deep breath and told him something that sounded impossible. She said he must marry her granddaughter. Jake blinked and asked her to repeat what she just said because he thought he heard wrong. Lyra said it again clearly. She wanted Jake to marry her granddaughter Elena, and he was the only person in the entire galaxy who could save the young woman now. Amy stepped forward and asked why Elena needed saving, and what marrying a stranger would do to help. Lyra explained that something terrible called the Covenant of Blood had been placed on her granddaughter. It was an ancient curse used by an evil being known as the Void King. The curse slowly changed people into servants of darkness. Once the change finished, the victim became a puppet with all their memories and skills, but they only served the Void King. Elena had been fighting this curse for 3 months and time was running out. Jake asked why marriage would break. This curse. Lyra pulled out an old device that showed text in her language. The words changed to English, so Jake could read them. According to ancient Silvari laws, the Covenant of Blood could only be broken 3 ways. First was killing the Void King himself, but nobody knew where he truly lived. Second was having the cursed person's true love sacrifice themselves, which Elena did not have. The third way was a sacred marriage between the cursed person and a human warrior. Human souls were special because they could resist the corruption of the Void King better than any other species. If a human married someone with the curse through proper binding ceremonies, the human soul would act like a shield. Jake read the text twice to make sure he understood correctly. He asked if this was really the only way to save her granddaughter. Lyra nodded and fresh tears rolled down her face. She said Elena was running out of time. The black marks of the curse were spreading across her skin and would reach her heart in 3 days. After that, nothing could save her. Jake heard a sound, then that made the metal floor under his feet vibrate. It was a low growl that came from deep in the shadows near the cargo containers. 2 huge golden eyes appeared in the darkness. They were shaped like cat eyes, but much bigger than any cat Jake had ever seen. The temperature in the cargo bay suddenly got hotter. Jake could feel sweat forming on his forehead even though the ship's cooling system was working fine. He asked what was making that sound, even though part of him already knew the answer. Lyra turned toward the shadows and spoke softly in her own language. Something massive moved in the darkness. Scales scraped against metal wings unfolded that were too large for the space they were in. A dragon stepped into the light. Jake had seen many strange creatures during his years exploring space, but nothing prepared him for this. The dragon was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Her scales shifted between red and gold colors like living fire. She was as big as a small spacecraft with wings that brushed against the ceiling. Her tail was thick and covered in sharp ridges. Smoke drifted from her nose with each breath. The dragon's eyes stared at Jake with clear intelligence. This was not some mindless animal. This creature was smart and aware, and judging him, Lyra said the dragon's name was Ember. and she was bonded to Elena for life dragons, and their riders shared a connection that could not be broken. If Elena fell to the curse and became a servant of darkness, then Ember would either die trying to free her, or become corrupted as well. Jake felt his mouth go dry as he understood what that meant. Amy had pulled out her data pad and was reading information quickly. She looked up with a pale face and told Jake that bonded dragons were incredibly powerful. If Ember became corrupted, she could destroy entire planets before anyone could stop her. The dragon would burn world after world until somebody killed her. Lyra confirmed this with a sad nod. She said that was why she came begging to a stranger if Jake refused to help. Then Elena planned to take Ember far away from all civilized worlds. She would go to the empty void between galaxies and end both their lives before the corruption finished. It was the only way to protect innocent people from what she might become. Jake looked at this old woman who had set aside all her pride to kneel before him. He looked at the massive dragon who watched him with eyes that seemed to see into his soul. He thought about a young woman he had never met who was willing to die rather than hurt others. His crew was silent behind him, waiting to see what he would decide. Amy caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She was warning him not to make a quick choice about something this serious. Marriage to a stranger was one thing, but this was a soul-binding ceremony that could never be undone. According to what Lyra showed them, the bond would connect Jake and Elena at a level deeper than most people could imagine. They would feel each other's emotions and always know where the other person was. Some bonded pairs could even share thoughts. The connection lasted until death, and there was no way to break it. Early, Jake asked how long he had to make his decision. Lyra's voice shook as she answered. Elena had 72 hours before the curse marks reached her heart. After that, no power in the universe could save her. Jake told Lyra he needed time to think and asked if she and Elena had somewhere safe to stay. Lyra said they would remain on the ship if he allowed. Jake agreed and told them they could use the cargo bay. Amy assigned someone to bring them supplies and blankets. After Lyra and Ember settled into a corner, Jake went to his private quarters. He sat down and put his head in his hands. Amy followed him and brought coffee without being asked. She sat across from him and waited. Jake finally asked her what she thought he should do. Amy sighed and said she could not answer that for him. This was bigger than any decision he had made before. If he agreed, he would be giving up his freedom to save someone he did not know. His entire future would change. If he refused, a woman and her dragon would die. Maybe thousands of other people would die too. If Ember lost control before Elena could stop her. Amy said Jake was a good man and she trusted him to make the right choice. But she reminded him that he was not responsible for every tragedy in the galaxy. Sometimes bad things happened and one person could not fix everything. Jake knew she was right, but he also knew something else. He became a space explorer because he wanted to help people. He joined the crew of the Wanderer's Hope because he believed in making the universe a better place. How could he refuse to help when someone literally came begging for his aid? He spent the next several hours reading everything he could find about Sylvari culture and bonding ceremonies. He learned that soul bindings were sacred and permanent. He learned that the Void King was a mysterious evil force that had been corrupting worlds for thousands of years. He learned that nobody had ever broken free from the covenant of blood curse before. If he helped Elena, she would be the first person in recorded history to escape. That would make her a symbol of hope to everyone fighting against the Void King. It would also make her and Jake targets for revenge. The more Jake read, the more he understood how dangerous this path would be. But he also understood that doing nothing was its own kind of danger. He stood up and looked out the window of his quarters at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, a young woman was fighting darkness with everything she had. She deserved help. She deserved a chance. Jake made his decision. He would meet Elena tomorrow and get to know her. If she was truly willing to die rather than hurt innocents, then she was worth saving. And if saving her meant binding his soul to hers forever, then that was a price he could pay, because that was what heroes did. They helped people even when it was hard. They made sacrifices even when it hurt. They chose hope over fear. Jake finished his coffee and went to tell Amy his choice. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She said she would support whatever he decided. The crew would stand by him no matter what happened next. Jake felt grateful for that. He would need all the support he could get for what came next, in the cargo bay. Ember curled protectively around Grandmother Lyra. The old woman stroked the dragon's scales and whispered prayers in her ancient language. She prayed that the human captain would say yes. She prayed that her granddaughter would survive. She prayed that maybe this time hope would win against the darkness, the dragon. Jake woke up early the next morning with his decision already made. He would meet Elena and talk to her before agreeing to anything, if he was going to bind his soul to someone forever. He wanted to know who she really was. He dressed in his standard uniform and went to the cargo bay where Grandmother Lyra was waiting. The old woman looked hopeful when she saw him approach. Jake told her he wanted to meet her granddaughter. Lyra smiled and nodded, then called out in her musical language. A figure emerged from behind one of the large cargo containers. Jake had expected someone fragile and weak. He had imagined a sick woman who could barely stand. What he saw instead made him stop walking. Elena Starweaver was a warrior. She stood nearly 6 feet, tall with the same pointed ears as her grandmother. Her hair was pure white, which seemed unusual for someone young. It was tied back in a tight braid that hung down her back. She wore black armor that looked like it had seen many battles. There were scorch marks and dents all over the metal plates. Her violet eyes were hard and cold like frozen crystal. She looked at Jake without any emotion on her face. Behind her stood Ember, and the dragon was watching Jake very carefully. Golden eyes tracked his every movement. Smoke drifted from the dragon's nose with each breath. Jake could feel the heat coming from Ember's body, even from several feet away. Grandmother Lyra explained the situation to Elena in their language. Jake watched as Elena's expression changed from neutral to angry. She responded quickly in Silvery, and her voice was sharp. Even without understanding the words, Jake could tell she was upset. Lyra argued back gently but firmly. The two women talked for several minutes while Jake waited. Finally, Elena turned to face him directly. She spoke in perfect English with only a slight musical accent. She said absolutely not. She told her grandmother that she already said she would handle this herself. Lyra's voice became hard, despite her frail appearance. She told Elena that she had been trying to handle it for 3 months. The curse marks were getting darker every single day. Soon there would not be enough of Elena left to save. Jake noticed it. Then black veins traced up Elena's neck from under her armor collar. They looked like dark rivers running under her pale skin. The veins seemed to pulse with their own sick light. They moved slowly like oil spreading through water. Jake asked what exactly was happening to her. Elena's jaw tightened. She clearly did not want to answer his questions, but her grandmother gave her a pleading look that finally broke through her anger. Elena took a deep breath and began to explain. 6 months ago, her military unit was sent on a mission to the Dead Zones. These were areas of space controlled by the Void King's forces. Her squadron of 37 silvery warriors and their dragons went to gather information. But the enemy was waiting for them. It was an ambush. The Void King's creatures attacked, without warning. Shadow beings came from every direction. They killed Elena's entire squadron in just a few minutes. Everyone died except for her. Elena only survived because Ember created a shield of fire hot enough to destroy the shadow creatures. But before they escaped, one of the enemy commanders marked her. The creature was called a soul render. It touched Elena and spoke words in a language older than stars. The covenant of blood curse entered her body in that moment. Elena explained that the curse slowly changed the victim into a servant of the void. King, it took over their body piece by piece. First the skin turned black where the marks spread, then the person started hearing whispers in their mind. The whispers promised power and peace. They made darkness sound like something good. As time passed, the cursed person felt less and less like themselves. Their memories stayed intact, but their will to resist faded away. Eventually, the transformation completed and the person became a puppet. They looked the same and remembered everything, but they only served the Void King. Jake asked about the dragon. What happened to bonded dragons when their riders were corrupted? Amy had been standing nearby, listening to everything. She spoke up and said she had researched this dragons, bonded with their riders for life. The connection between them could not be broken by anything except death. If the rider became corrupted, the dragon had only two choices. The dragon could die, trying to free their rider from the curse, or the dragon would become corrupted as well and turn into a monster. Amy looked at her datapad and read more information. She said Ember was classified as an extremely powerful dragon. If Ember became corrupted, she could burn through dozens of worlds before anyone stopped her. Elena confirmed this with a sad nod. She said that was exactly why she had been living in exile. She refused to let her curse become everyone else's nightmare. For 3 months she stayed away from all populated areas. She only came near civilization. Because her grandmother tracked her down, Lyra had begged her to try this one last chance at survival. But Elena did not want to force a stranger into binding his soul to hers. Jake asked why marriage to him would help break the curse. Grandmother Lyra pulled out her old device again. She showed Jake the ancient text written in Old Silvari. The words translated automatically to English on the screen, according to the laws written thousands of years ago. The covenant of blood could only be broken 3 ways. The first way was to kill the Void King himself. But nobody knew where the Void King truly lived. He existed somewhere far away and controlled his armies through magic. The second way was for the cursed person's true love to sacrifice themselves, willingly. But Elena did not have a true love. She had devoted her life to being a warrior. The third way was through a sacred marriage bond with a human warrior. Human souls had a special quality that made them resistant to void corruption. If a human bonded their soul to a cursed person through proper ceremonies, the human soul would act like a shield. The curse could not survive when confronted with a human soul. Bond Lyra said this was ancient magic that few people understood anymore. But the law was clear and had never been proven wrong. Jake stared at the text on the screen. He asked what would happen if he said no. Elena's face showed no emotion, but something flickered in her eyes. Maybe it was relief or maybe disappointment. Jake could not tell which. Elena answered in a calm voice. She said if Jake refused, then she would take Ember to the deepest empty space between galaxies. There she would end both their lives before the corruption finished taking over. It was the only honorable choice left to her. The cargo bay became very quiet. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ship's engines and Ember's breathing. Jake looked at Amy. His first officer shrugged helplessly because this decision was too big for her to help with. He looked at his other crew members who had gathered to watch. They all seemed to be holding their breath. Then Jake looked back at Elena. He saw the black veins spreading across her skin. He saw how she stood proud and straight, even while offering to die. She was willing to kill herself rather than become a monster. That took incredible courage. Jake asked how long he had to make his decision. Grandmother Lyra's voice was soft and sad. She told him the marks would reach Elena's heart in 72 hours after. That time, no power in the entire universe could save her. The curse would complete, and Elena would belong to the Void King forever. Jake nodded slowly. He said he needed to think about this carefully, but he also wanted to spend time talking with Elena if he was going to bind his soul to someone he wanted to know them first. Elena looked surprised by this request. She asked why he would want to waste time talking. Either he would agree to help or he would not. What difference did talking make? Jake smiled, slightly. He said it made all the difference in the world. Elena was not just a mission or a problem that needed solving. She was a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams. If Jake was going to tie his soul to hers forever, he wanted to know the real person. He wanted to know who she was beyond just being a cursed warrior. For the first time, Elena's hard expression softened just a little bit. She asked why that mattered to him. Jake said it mattered because she mattered. Every person had value and deserved to be seen as more than their problems. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Her violet eyes searched his face, looking for lies or tricks. But Jake met her gaze steadily. He meant every word he said. Finally, Elena nodded once. She agreed to talk with him. Grandmother Lyra looked relieved and happy. She told them she would give them privacy. The old woman walked away with surprising energy for someone so frail. Ember made a low rumbling sound. The dragon seemed to be asking Elena if this was okay. Elena reached up and touched Ember's massive head gently. She spoke soft words in silvery that seemed to calm the dragon. Then Elena turned back to Jake. She asked what he wanted to know. Jake sat down on a supply crate. He told Elena to start from the beginning. He wanted to know about her life before the curse. What did she like to do? What made her happy? What were her dreams for the future? Elena looked uncomfortable with these questions. She was clearly not used to talking about herself, but slowly, she began to answer. She told Jake that she grew up on a forest world called Sylvamere. It was a beautiful place covered in ancient trees that reached up to touch the sky. The Silvery lived in cities built into the branches high above the ground. Elena spent her childhood learning the ways of her people. She studied history and music and the ancient arts of magic. When she turned 16, she was chosen to bond with a dragon egg dragons, only hatched when they found someone worthy to bond with. Ember hatched for Elena, and from that moment they were connected forever. Elena trained as a dragon rider and warrior. She learned to fly through the sky on Ember's back. She learned to fight with blade and bow. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived with strange quietness throughout the ship. Jake woke up feeling nervous and excited at the same time. Today he would bind his soul to Elena forever. There was no going back after this. He got dressed in his best uniform. Amy knocked on his door and came in carrying a cup of coffee. She asked if he was really sure about this decision. Jake nodded and said he had never been more certain of anything in his life. Amy smiled and told him she was proud to serve with him. She said the whole crew supported his choice. They all believed he was doing something incredibly brave. Jake finished his coffee and headed to the observation deck where the ceremony would take place. The observation deck was the largest open space on the ship. It had huge windows that looked out at the stars. Grandmother Lyra had decorated the space with bioluminescent plants from her homeworld. They glowed with soft blue and green light. The effect was beautiful and otherworldly. The crew gathered in a circle around the center of the deck. Amy stood near the front Claire. The pilot was there with Tommy the engineer. A dozen other crew members came to witness this historic moment. Everyone wore their dress uniforms. They all looked solemn and respectful. Elena arrived next. Jake's breath caught when he saw her. She wore traditional Silveri ceremonial robes instead of her usual armor. The robes were made of silver fabric that seemed to shimmer like moonlight. Her white hair hung loose around her shoulders. She looked both beautiful and nervous. Behind Elena came Ember. The dragon had to crouch low to fit through the doorway. Her scales gleamed red and gold in the soft light from the plants. Ember positioned herself behind Elena like a guardian. Dragon's presence filled the entire observation deck. Grandmother Lyra stood in the center of the circle. Despite her age and frail appearance, she radiated power and authority. This was no ordinary elder. She was a high oracle of her people. She had performed sacred ceremonies for hundreds of years. Lyra began to speak in Old Silveri. Her voice was strong and clear. It did not sound like the voice of an old woman anymore. It sounded ageless and filled with ancient magic. Jake and Elena walked forward to face each other. Jake could see the black veins on Elena's neck. They had spread even further in the last day. The curse marks now reached halfway up. Her jaw. Time was almost out. Lyra switched to English so everyone could understand. She explained that the soul bonding ceremony was sacred and permanent. Once completed, the bond could never be broken except by death. The two souls would become connected at the deepest level. They would feel each other's emotions. They would always know where the other person was. In some cases, they might even share thoughts. Lyra asked Jake if he offered his soul freely. She asked if he understood that this bond could not be undone. Jake's voice was steady when he answered. He said yes. He offered his soul freely. He understood the consequences and accepted them. Lyra turned to Elena. She asked if Elena accepted this soul binding. She asked if Elena understood she would carry the weight of 2 lives instead of 1. Elena's voice shook slightly, but she answered clearly. She said, yes, she accepted the bond. She would carry both their lives with honor. Lyra smiled and raised her hands. She began to draw symbols in the air using special ink that glowed bright white. The ink seemed to hang suspended in space. Each symbol was complex and beautiful. They were letters from a language older than any living civilization. Lyra drew 7 symbols in total. Then she began to sing. The song was in Old Silvery, and it made Jake's skin tingle. The words felt less like language and more like pure music given form. The glowing symbols began to move. They spun slowly in the air between Jake and Elena. The light grew brighter and brighter. Jake reached out and took Elena's hands. Her skin was warm, despite the curse marks. He could feel her trembling, slightly. Through the growing light, he saw her violet eyes looking at him with trust and fear. Lyra's song reached a peak. The symbols suddenly rushed toward Jake and Elena. They hit both of them in the chest. Jake gasped as something fundamental shifted. Deep inside him, it felt like the core of his being had just been torn open and reshaped. He could suddenly feel Elena, not just her physical presence, but everything she was feeling. Her fear crashed through him like a wave. Her desperate hope burned bright. Her gratitude poured over him, and underneath it all was the curse. Jake felt the darkness that had been slowly consuming Elena for 3 months. It was cold and oily and wrong. The Void King's whispers echoed in his mind now too. They promised rest and peace, and an end to struggle, but Jake's human soul reacted like Lyra said it would. His soul was different from Elena's. Silveri soul. It had a quality that resisted the corruption naturally. Where the curse tried to spread into Jake, it hit a wall, the darkness, crashed against his human soul and broke apart. Elena cried out in pain. The black marks on her neck suddenly flared bright like they were on fire. Jake held her hands tighter, refusing to let go. He could feel the Void King's curse fighting back. It did not want to release its hold on Elena. The whispers in Jake's mind grew louder and more insistent. They told him to let go. They said he was making a mistake. They promised he would regret this choice. But Jake ignored the voices. He focused on Elena. He poured every bit of determination and strength he had through their new bond. The golden light where their hands joined grew brighter. It started to spread up Elena's arms. Everywhere the gold light touched, the black curse marks retreated. The darkness writhed. Like a living thing, it pulled back from Elena's face and neck. The black veins tried to dig deeper to escape the light, but there was nowhere left to hide. Jake's human soul was like a fortress. The corruption broke against it again and again. The Void King's whispers turned to screams of rage. Elena was shaking now, tears streamed down her face. She told Jake it hurt. The curse was being ripped out of her, and it felt like her soul was being torn apart. Jake said he knew. He could feel her pain through their bond. But he also told her to hold on. This would be over soon. She just had to keep fighting for a few more moments. Ember roared behind them. Fire erupted from the dragon's mouth. The flames bathed the observation deck in golden light. But the fire did not burn anyone. It was warm and comforting like sunlight. Ember was adding her own power to the ceremony. The dragon's ancient magic joined with the soul bond. Together they pushed back against the curse. The black marks retreated faster now. They pulled down Elena's arms toward her hands. Where Jake held her, the gold light was brightest. The darkness could not survive that pure connection. With a sound like shattering glass, the last piece of the curse broke. The black marks vanished completely. Elena's skin was clear and pale with no trace of corruption. She collapsed forward. Jake caught her and lowered them both to the deck. He cradled her in his arms while she gasped for breath. Her whole body was shaking from exhaustion. Grandmother Lyra kneeled beside them. Tears ran down the old woman's face. She touched Elena's forehead gently. Then she looked at Jake with profound gratitude. Lyra said it was done. The curse was broken. Elena was free. The crew erupted in cheers and applause. Amy was wiping tears from her own eyes. Claire and Tommy hugged each other in relief. Everyone had been holding their breath, waiting to see if the ceremony would work. Now they celebrated like they had just won a great victory. Ember threw back her head and roared again. This time it was clearly a sound of pure joy. The dragon's eyes found Jake's in that moment. Jake understood something important. Ember was thanking him. He had saved her rider. The dragon would never forget that. She would protect Jake just as fiercely as she. Protected Elena. That was a promise. Jake looked down at Elena in his arms. Her eyes were closed, but she was breathing steadily. He could feel through their bond that she was okay. She was just exhausted from the ordeal, but underneath the exhaustion was something else. Relief flooded through her. For the first time in 3 months, she did not feel the curse eating away at her. For the first time in 3 months, the whispers were silent. She was free. Elena's eyes slowly opened. She looked up at Jake with wonder and disbelief. She whispered, "Thank you," so quietly he almost did not hear it. Jake smiled and told her they were in this together now. She did not need to thank him. Elena tried to sit up and Jake helped her. She was still weak but getting stronger. By the minute Lyra handed her a cup of water, Elena drank it gratefully. The crew gave them space but stayed nearby. Everyone wanted to see that Elena was truly okay. Amy approached and asked if they needed anything. Jake said they were fine. He asked everyone to give them a few minutes. The crew slowly left the observation deck. Lyra kissed Elena's forehead and then Jake's. She told them both that they were brave, and she was honored to witness their bond. Then the old woman left too. Only Ember remained. The dragon curled her massive body around Jake and Elena protectively. Her warmth surrounded them like a blanket. Jake could feel the bond with Elena settling into place. It was strange, but not uncomfortable. He was aware of her presence in his mind, like a soft glow. He could sense her emotions clearly. Right now she felt grateful and overwhelmed and cautiously hopeful. Elena looked at him with new understanding in her eyes. She said she could feel him too. She could sense his kindness and determination, could feel that he truly meant everything he said before. He really did think they could be friends or maybe more. Jake asked how she felt about that. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said she felt scared, but also excited. Everything had changed. So fast yesterday they were strangers. Now they were bonded for life, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this bond could become something good. Jake agreed. He said they would figure everything out together. Peace lasted exactly 2 days after the bonding ceremony. Jake was on the bridge reviewing supply reports with Amy when every alarm on the ship started screaming at once. Red lights flashed throughout the entire vessel. Claire spun around from her pilot station with fear on her face. She told Jake they had incoming ships. Multiple contacts were appearing from void space at extremely high speed. Jake rushed to the tactical display screen. He asked how many enemy ships were coming. Claire's voice shook as she counted. She said 12 contacts at first, then 15, then 20. The numbers kept climbing higher and higher. 25 enemy ships now. 30 ships. The contacts were multiplying faster than she could count them. Jake's blood went cold when the sensor data showed what kind of ships these were. They were angular and black as the void itself. The hulls seemed to bend light around them. These were Reaper-class destroyers from the void, King's fleet. Jake had seen classified reports about these vessels. Each one could destroy a small moon, and 30 of them were heading straight toward the Wanderers. Hopami asked how the enemy found them. They were in the middle of nowhere using full stealth protocols. Nobody should have been able to track them. A voice spoke from the bridge entrance. Elena stood there wearing her full armor again. Ember's massive head was visible through the doorway behind her. The dragon could not fit on the bridge, but her presence was felt. Elena's expression was grim and angry. She said the enemy did not find the ship. They found her. The Void King did not release his marked ones easily. When Jake broke the curse, it was like lighting a giant beacon across the void. The Void King knew what they did. Now he was coming to make them pay for it. Jake asked Claire how long until the enemy ships reached weapon range. Claire checked her instruments quickly. She said 6 minutes, maybe less if the destroyers kept accelerating at their current speed. Jake asked Tommy over the intercom how long until they could jump to faster than light speed. Tommy's worried voice crackled through the speakers. He said 10 minutes. They had just finished maintenance on the drive core. It needed time to warm up and reach full power. Jake did the math in his head. They needed to survive 4 minutes longer than their ship could give them. 4 minutes against 30 Reaper destroyers. The odds were impossible. Jake turned to Elena. He asked if Ember could fight in the vacuum of space. Elena's Laugh was bitter and harsh. She told Jake that Ember was a void dragon. Dragons like her were born in the empty space between stars. Vacuum was Ember's natural home. She could fight better in space than anywhere else. Jake nodded and started giving orders, rapidly. He told Amy to get everyone to battle stations immediately. He told Claire to start evasive pattern Delta 7. He told Tommy over the intercom that he needed faster than light drive in 8 minutes instead of 10. Tommy protested that it was not possible. Jake said he did not care what was possible. He told Tommy to make it happen even if he had to sacrifice the coffee maker to the engine gods. Then Jake turned to Elena. He said he needed her and Ember ready to launch. Elena was already moving toward the cargo bay. She said they would show these Void King servants why you never attack a bonded dragon rider. 5 minutes later, the battle began. The Wanderer's hope twisted and turned through space like a leaf in a storm. Claire was an incredibly skilled pilot. She flew the ship through patterns that should have been impossible. The Reaper destroyers had spread out in a wide net. They created overlapping fields of fire that turned empty space into a death trap. Energy beams cut through the void. Each beam could slice through starship armor like it was paper. The Wanderer rolled and dove around the attacks. Some of the beams missed by only a few meters. The ship shuddered every time an energy blast came close. Amy watched her instruments. With growing concern, she reported that their shield generators were at 40% power. 3 more direct hits would destroy the shields completely. Without shields, the ship would be dead. In space. Jake asked Tommy for good news. Tommy said 2 minutes, until faster than light drive was ready. But he really needed Jake to keep the ship in one piece until then. Jake said he would pass that suggestion along to the people shooting at them. Claire suddenly called out a warning. One of the destroyers was breaking away from the main formation. It was moving to block their escape route. If that destroyer reached the right position, they would have 2 bad choices. They could jump straight into the destroyer's weapons, or they could stay and fight 30 enemy ships. Neither option would end well for them. Jake started to give Elena an order, but she interrupted him. She said she was already on it through their bond. Jake felt her determination burning like a star. Elena shouted a command to Ember in the silvery language. The cargo bay doors exploded outward. Ember launched into space like a missile. Jake watched through the bridge view screen as something incredible happened. The dragon moved through vacuum as easily as if she was flying through air. Her massive wings somehow propelled her forward despite having nothing to push against. Fire surrounded her entire body. But this was not normal fire. It was flame that burned without oxygen, pure energy. Given physical form, Ember hit the lead Reaper destroyer, like a meteor striking a planet. Her claws were longer than a human was tall. They raked across the black hull of the destroyer. Where the claws touched the metal turned white hot and began to melt. The destroyer's weapons tried to track Ember and shoot her, but she was too fast and too agile. She dove beneath the ship. She came up on the other side. Then she opened her massive jaws. The stream of fire that came out was beyond anything Jake had ever seen. His instruments went crazy. They showed impossible energy readings. They warned about violations of basic physics. The destroyer's shields held for about 3 seconds. Then they collapsed like they were made of paper. Ember's fire carved through the destroyer's hull. Silent explosions bloomed in the vacuum. As the ship broke apart, pieces of the destroyer spun away in all directions. Amy whispered in amazement at what they had just witnessed. But there was no time to celebrate their small victory. The other destroyers turned their attention to Ember. All of them focused their weapons on the dragon. Elena stood at the bridge viewport. Her hands were clenched into tight fists. Her face showed intense concentration. Through their bond, Jake could feel her directing Ember. She guided the dragon through the maze of enemy fire using only her thoughts. The connection between rider and dragon was perfect. They moved as one being. Tommy's voice came over the intercom. He said 1 minute until faster than light drive was ready. Claire reported that the destroyers were adjusting their formation. They were trying to box the Wanderer's hope in. Soon there would be no room left to maneuver. Jake made a quick decision. He told Claire to take the ship directly toward where Ember was fighting. Amy looked shocked. She asked if Jake was sure about this. Jake told Amy to prepare all the missiles in the rear launch tubes. When they passed the dragon, he wanted every single missile fired at the destroyers behind them. Amy protested that would use up their entire missile supply. If this plan did not work, they would have no weapons left. Jake said if the plan did not work, they would all be dead anyway. Dead people did not need missiles. Amy reluctantly began preparing the weapons. The Wanderer's hope accelerated toward where Ember was locked in combat with 3 destroyers. The dragon saw them coming. Through the bond. Elena understood Jake's plan immediately. Ember performed a maneuver that should have been physically impossible. She looped around one destroyer and used its hull as a shield. The other destroyers could not shoot at her without hitting their ally. The Wanderer shot past Ember at full speed. Jake shouted for Amy to fire everything. 47 missiles launched from the rear of the ship. They streaked toward the yaw, pursuing destroyers in a deadly swarm. At the exact same moment, Ember spun around. She added her fire to the missile barrage. The result was catastrophic for the Void King's fleet. 4 destroyers vanished in massive overlapping explosions. 2 more were heavily damaged. Their engines were destroyed and they drifted helplessly. The surviving enemy ships broke off their pursuit. They regrouped at a safer distance. Clearly, they had not expected this level of resistance. Tommy's voice was urgent over the intercom. He counted down from 10, 9, 8, 7. Ember streaked back toward the Wanderer at incredible speed. Elena guided her dragon toward the open cargo bay doors. The dragon folded her wings tight against her body. She dove through the opening with less than a meter of clearance on each side. Tommy reached one in his countdown. Reality seemed to twist and bend around the ship. The stars stretched into long lines of light. The Wanderer's hope tore a hole through space and time. In an instant they vanished. They left the Void King's fleet far behind. In the cargo bay, Elena collapsed against Ember's side. The connection to her dragon during combat was intense. It took everything she had to maintain it during a battle. Now that the adrenaline was fading, she could barely stand. Her legs felt like water. Jake was already running from the bridge. His boots pounded against the metal deck plates. He burst into the cargo bay, breathing hard. He found Elena sitting on the floor. She was leaning against Ember's massive scaled flank. The dragon had her head lowered protectively over her rider. Jake kneeled beside Elena. He asked if she was okay. Elena tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a gasp. She told him to ask her again in an hour when she could feel her legs. But despite her exhaustion, she was smiling. It was a real, genuine smile that made her look happy. She said they actually survived. Haven Station was massive beyond anything Jake had ever seen before. The station was a giant cylinder rotating slowly in the void of space. It was large enough to create its own artificial gravity through the spinning motion. More than 50,000 people from 100 different species lived there. The station had gardens and markets and entire neighborhoods built into its curved interior walls. When the Wanderer's hope docked, Jake discovered that word about them had already spread everywhere. He and Elena went. People stared and whispered. Some looked at them with hope in their eyes. Others looked with fear or suspicion. Everyone seemed to know about the human who married a cursed alien. Everyone knew about the dragon rider who broke the unbreakable curse. They had been at Haven Station for less than 6 hours when Grandmother Lyra appeared at their ship. The old woman had traveled separately after the bonding ceremony. Now she arrived with important news. Lyra did not waste time with pleasantries. She told them that word had spread across the entire sector. The Silvery Worlds knew what happened. Resistance cells fighting the Void. King's expansion, new underground networks of free peoples everywhere knew. They all heard that Elena was free from the curse. Lyra paused and looked at both Jake and Elena seriously. She said that now people wanted to know if they could do it again. Could they save others who had been marked by the covenant of blood? That was how Jake found himself in a secret meeting, deep in Haven Station's lower levels. The meeting room was hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned storage area. Representatives from a dozen different resistance groups gathered there. Commander Lisa Grant was there. She was a former Earth Defense Force officer. Her entire fleet had been corrupted by Void King forces 3 years ago. She barely escaped with her life. Since then, she had been fighting a guerrilla war against the enemy. Kyle Sunfire sat across from Lisa. He was a male silvery warrior. with golden hair and green eyes. His entire Dragon Rider wing had been marked by the Covenant of Blood 23 riders, 23 dragons, all cursed and slowly being consumed by darkness. Cale had been searching for a cure for 2 years with no success. Dr. Nina Walsh was also present. She was a human scientist who dedicated her life to studying Void King corruption. She had been looking for weaknesses in his forces for 10 years. There were others too, soldiers and pilots and researchers, from many different worlds. All of them had lost people to the Void. King, all of them wanted revenge. Lisa got straight to the point. She said they needed to understand how Jake broke the Covenant of Blood. They needed to know if the process could be repeated. Could they save others? Jake looked at Elena. She stood beside him with Ember's presence felt through their bond, even though the dragon was back on the ship. Elena nodded slightly. She expected these questions. Jake began to explain carefully. He said the answer was complicated. According to ancient Silveri texts, a human soul bonded through marriage could shield against void corruption. But it was not a simple cure that worked automatically. The ceremony required a legitimate soul binding. That meant genuine commitment between two people. It could not be faked. The bond did not work if the connection was not real. Cale spoke up slowly. He asked if Jake was saying that to save his wing. He would need to find 23 humans. 23 humans willing to marry complete strangers. 23 humans willing to bind their souls forever to people they did not know. Jake said that was theoretically possible, but it would be incredibly difficult. They would need humans willing to take that enormous risk. They would need cursed individuals who could survive long enough for the ceremony. Dr. Walsh asked how long someone marked had before corruption completed. Elena answered this question. She said it varied from person to person. For her it took 3 months, but she heard of cases where transformation happened in only a few weeks. The more you fought the curse, the longer you lasted. But fighting made the pain worse. The room fell into heavy silence. Everyone processed what this meant. Then Lisa spoke again. She suggested a different approach. Instead of trying to cure everyone who was corrupted, what if they attacked the source? What if they found a way to kill the Void King himself? Cale immediately said, that was impossible. The Void King was immortal. Everyone knew that. Lisa disagreed strongly. She said nothing was truly immortal. The Void King was powerful, but he was not a god. He was some kind of entity that learned to project his consciousness across vast distances. That took energy. It required infrastructure and technology. If they could find that infrastructure and destroy it, they might be able to kill him. Dr. Walsh suddenly leaned forward with excitement in her eyes. She said she had been tracking Void King fleet movements for years. There was a pattern in how his ships moved. They all seemed to come from a central point deep in the dead zones. She always assumed it was his throne world. But what if it was more than just a planet? What if it was the nexus point for his consciousness projection? The place where he channeled his power across the galaxy. Cale shook his head. He said invading the heart of Void King territory was suicide. Lisa corrected him sharply. She said it was not suicide. It was war in war. Sometimes the only way to win was to take risks. That looked impossible. Jake felt Elena's emotions through their bond. She felt fear mixed with determination. She understood what was being suggested. This would turn their personal survival into all-out warfare. Jake spoke carefully. He said if they did this, they would need more than a few resistance cells. They would need a fleet of ships. They would need warriors and pilots and weapons. They would need an entire army. Lisa's eyes gleamed with fierce determination. She said, then they would build an army. Resistance had been fighting in shadows for years. Maybe it was time to step into the light. They could use Elena's freedom as a rallying cry. They could show the galaxy that the Void King could be beaten. Elena asked a quiet question that made everyone pause. She asked what would happen to the people currently marked by the curse. The ones who did not have human partners to save them. What happened to them when war started? The room had no good answer for that question. The next 3 weeks became a blur of constant activity. Lisa's contacts in Earth Defense Force were not officially authorized, but unofficially the military command was very interested in anything that weakened the Void. Kingships began arriving at Haven Station. Old frigates were pulled out of storage and repaired civilian vessels were retrofitted with military weapons. A few cutting-edge cruisers showed up. Their presence was definitely not approved by any official chain of command. Kale used his connections in the Sylvari worlds to recruit dragon riders, not the corrupted ones but those who lost their bonded partners. Riders who were willing to risk everything for revenge against the Void. King Ember became a symbol of hope because of her incredible power. Other dragons followed her lead. Dr. Walsh set up a research laboratory on Haven Station. She analyzed every piece of data they had about Void King technology. She made important breakthroughs in understanding how the corruption worked. The information might give them an edge in the coming fight. Jake found himself accidentally becoming the leader of this growing resistance movement. It started small. A few corrupted individuals heard about Elena's cure and came seeking help. Jake could not bind his soul to all of them. He was already bonded to Elena. But he started connecting desperate people with human volunteers from the growing fleet. Some volunteers were soldiers looking for a meaningful cause to fight for. Others were civilians who lost everything to the Void King. They wanted to fight back in any way possible. Each successful cure was celebrated as a victory. Each failure was a harsh reminder of what they faced. Sometimes the corruption was too advanced. Sometimes the bonding ceremony could not create a strong enough connection. Those failures hurt deeply through it all. Jake's bond with Elena grew stronger every day. They trained together, learning to fight as a bonded pair. Ember participated in their training sessions. The three of them became a unified team. Jake and Elena planned strategy together. They combined Jake's tactical experience with Elena's knowledge of Sylvari warfare. Slowly and carefully, they began to know each other as more than just partners. They became friends. One night, they sat together in the observation deck watching stars drift past. Elena asked Jake to tell her about Earth. Jake talked about blue skies that stretched forever. He described green grass and forests. He told her about oceans so large you could not see the other side. Described cities that glittered like jewels when night fell. Jake talked about his childhood in a small, quiet town. He explained why he'd joined the Exploration Corps. He wanted to see the universe beyond his home world. He told her about the family he left behind to chase adventure among distant stars. Elena listened carefully to every word. She asked if Jake missed Earth. Jake admitted that sometimes he did miss it, but he would not trade where he was now for anything. Through their bond, Elena felt the truth in his words. She felt surprised and cautiously happy. She said she never thought being bonded to a stranger could feel like coming home. Jake reached out and took her hand gently. He said they were not strangers anymore. Elena squeezed his hand. Back she agreed quietly. They were not strangers. They were something more now. Something neither of them had words for yet. But it felt right. The attack on Haven Station came without any warning. Defense systems detected void space ruptures too late. 15. Reaper destroyers emerged from darkness. With them came something far worse. A dreadnought appeared.